All right, another round, 2 episodes, which we seem to do in pairs.
I like that. I thought we would do one off a bunch of times, but I'm starting to like the kind of contrast of like 2 opposing ideas a lot. It's so that idea is so central to our friendship.
Opposing but friendly.
Right. Right. Well, the 2 like I think will bring out elements of each other. Nobody else in music fandom is about to pair the 2 things that we're about to pair, right? So
that's true.
Never not interesting, I hope.
Sampling culture and a very specific guitar pedal from the late 80s. Exciting. Yeah, so some of our prompts for kind of making these episodes and this idea have been, like you said, while they're contrasting ideas, some of them, like our introspection and direct action, were more, let's take the 2 ways we look at things and then put them together into a playlist. This is a little bit more like your turn and my turn, sort of like we did with instrumentals.
Yep.
But instead of the singular instrumentals prompt, we kind of have 2 pretty different ways of looking at maybe music discovery or appreciation would be a good way of putting it. I think we'll talk about this a little bit in both episodes, but in the case of what we're going to talk about here with sampling, like music becomes an endless branch of branches of branches, and whole new worlds open up as soon as you start asking basic questions about music. It takes you on endless journeys, and no one can end up in the same place. Whereas in other situations, like with me, and with us talking about the HM2 in the next episode, like that's going really far down into something really, 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 really
very
specific.
Narrow rabbit hole, yeah.
But they're both examples, I think, of like, I'll risk it. This is some of our expertise about music, in the form of prompts that no one would ever ask us for academically. So it's a good opportunity to learn from each other, which I think we both did during this, as always. But also other good examples of, like, we end up talking about this a lot, but part of the benefit of this podcast, I think, in terms of the content itself, is to help people not only rediscover music, but rediscover the way that they think about music, the way they discover new things as a result of listening to it. And so with this one, we're going to go real wide, real fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think the original question was, what's a thing that feels very personal to you, very specific to you about like the way you enjoy music or find new music? And just the way that we basically thought opposite about it. Like I went out and you went down, to your point, what was very interesting. But this one was almost a no-brainer for me, because I've been doing this kind of thing almost reflexively for so long. And I credit like 75% of the coolest music that I know to just like digging in crates and then digging in more crates and then asking people about the crates they dig in. And like also with sampling culture, there's such a like secret handshake thing and like a wink thing, I know producers and DJs are always trying to one up each other, and you see that on full display if you're any amount of fan of like a Questlove, where it's like, what's the most obscure thing that I can work into a set? And it's like, if one other person in the audience gets it, you're like, yeah, that's it. So it's broad and a little bit deep, I guess, in that way.
Also, I want to add one more thing, though.
Sure.
Because I realize this really needs to be said, because I'm not sure you could say it about yourself. Your knowledge of hip-hop is shocking, just purely based on outward appearances. No offenses, right? But like, no, I mean, I'm not the only person to experience that. Like, no, he knows. Like, you have the first sign that you know a lot about hip hop is that you would go, I don't think I know a lot about hip hop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I feel like that ought to be said, because this wasn't just why don't you pick a few popular songs and then trace their samples? Like, I knew when I asked you this that there would be 50 episodes worth of content easily.
So there is, to your point, an episode, like a playlist that we got down to just under 2 hours, maybe right at 2 hours. And then there's a whole other playlist of nearly 7 hours of additional source material that was sampled. and like 2 hours of that alone is stuff that Juicy J sampled. And we'll get into that, but like this is really a cave of wonders, and I hope that if anybody takes anything away from it, it's not that I know any amount of anything about anything, but it's that like there is almost it's just like stepping into the biggest library humanly possible, right? And it's very well organized, and it's easy to find a place to like spend the afternoon. Endless opportunities for joy, and you can get into new places really, really quickly. So it's a good shorthand for like finding a new thing to love.
Yeah.
And anytime I find stuff that has been sampled in a song, it has that vague familiarity where like you can put it on a playlist and put a playlist full of sampled shit at a party. Everybody's like, man, the music was dope tonight. Like, tell me more about it. And you just like send them the Spotify link. Like, wow, he knows all this obscure stuff. It's like, no, I don't. Producers do. And I'm just writing on their coattails. So I want to be super respectful of the fact that like I am not an expert by any means, but it's been a thing that's given me a lot of great joy. I also know that it's really a uniquely American thing, right? We have like jazz and the blues. And then this was like the next generation's offering of like a shared musical vocabulary and a cool thing to do. It really is like the Rosetta Stone of American music. If you study hip hop and you trace it back to all the music that they've sampled from, it never gets boring. I also want to call out that there are a lot of episodes, especially like when we're talking about albums, where we go really deep. Mm-hmm. I don't want this to be that, right? Like a lot of this music, I don't really know that much about. I didn't like spend a lot of time preparing, talking about the artist. I think it's more of an ideology that we're trying to get to. So I think the arc of this thing is, I'll start with some of my really personal stuff, right? Where I discovered the world within the world. And then kind of talk about my coming of age with it, and some of the producers I think are the most incredible at it. But that's certainly super personal, and I'm not trying to like start a debate or anything, but everybody kind of has their thing. And then we'll talk about like what ways it's being used interestingly now, and what I think are some of the really cool, like super, super current examples. So let's talk really quick though. Let's back up for just a second. Let's talk about like how it came to be, how it peaked kind of perfectly. Like there were kind of two things that happened, and it was in the 80s, and like with so many other things, it was really a function of technology and the tools that were available at the time. We're certainly going to talk about that with the HM2, right? There was not a thing, and then there was a thing, right? So I don't want to like belabor or mistell the story of how like kids in New York essentially started this idea of looping drum breaks and spinning records and like marking the place. And there are plenty of resources and references where you can go like see that part of it and how it was essentially like to start a party scene. But I love that idea, like knowing at least that little bit about it allows you to understand that it's like unlocking a layer almost of time and space. You know, you're like painting on top of a painting that exists. My original beef with sampling when I was a kid was that like it wasn't original, and that like nothing could be further from the truth, right? Inherently, anytime you create something new or you like reflect on any piece of criticism is also a piece of art, right? So I would encourage anybody that like doesn't really dig the idea of sampling to look at it with a little more of an open mind, as kind of its own thing. I loved in the 80s, this guy that wrote for The Guardian, David McNamee, wrote, sampling in hip hop had been a political act. 2 record decks and your dad's old funk collection was once the working class black answer to punk. So thinking of it as like giving yourself voice where there is not otherwise one is really interesting. And then the other thing was the Akai MPC was released in '88 that like kind of took it to the next level, and you could like capture little pieces of music and manipulate them less manually than with just two turntables. There's a book called Perfecting Sound Forever that's really good, and it invokes a song that we both love, When the Levee Breaks by Zeppelin. The author said, musicians didn't just want the sound of John Bonham's kick drum, they wanted to loop and repeat the whole of When the Levee Breaks. Said it was a very pleasant surprise after 60 years of recording. There are so many pre-recorded examples to sample from. Why reinvent the wheel? It makes a lot of sense.
Especially when you're talking about John Bonham.
Right.
Just done.
If you want a good drum sound, that guy strung a mic 30 feet above where he was drumming. There's no reason not to use something great like that. And like, if it moves you, why would you not pay homage to it or like try to keep unlocking the like secret sauce in that thing? So we were children of the 90s, like 80s babies, children of the 90s. So we have talked about a number of these artists kind of in different ways. We covered Tribe, and I don't remember the first Tribe song that I heard, but I remember there was a period of like first getting into Tribe and the Beastie Boys. Actually, that was probably my end, now that I think about it, was I loved Ill Communication. My cousin gave me a copy of Ill Communication because I thought Sabotage was like the sickest song ever. We had to be in like third grade, third-ish grade when that came out. And I would be, I remember like riding in the car with my dad to basketball practice, listening to that record. And it's got a song with Q-Tip on it, and worked my way back to Tribe through the Beastie Boys, I think. And they had the song Bonita, Applebaum, and it's got this really iconic sound in it that was also in a Fugees song that came out a couple years later, Killing Me Softly. And you know it as soon as you hear it. It's the bow, 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 bow. And I really hope that you'll replace me doing that with the actual sound effect.
I was gonna, but I won't now.
But it was like, wow, how did they get that sound? And then you learn by reading the liner notes, contains a sample of Memory Band by Rotary Connection. And you're like, what do you mean contains a sample of? And I feel really excited for kids now that have the Who Sampled app and have the world at their fingertips on YouTube. It can just be like, I want to hear that song right this second. It was more of a slog then. So like I didn't hear a lot of these original things until like middle school or even high school, when I would start downloading like shitty 128 megabits per second on Napster and Kazaa and stuff. And I remember the first time I was at my cousin Blake Norton's house. We stayed up all night, just like spinning records at his parents' house and downloading stuff and like making mix CDs. And I was like, what if we made a mix CD of all the original songs from the rap songs we like? And here in this first batch of things are some of the things that were on that CD. So loved Tribe. One of my favorite Tribe songs is Vibes and Stuff on Low End Theory. So we sampled Grant Green on that. And like, you got to acknowledge Q-Tip, right? And I think we kind of did in the episode.
Yeah, we tried.
As like a master of patching together interesting combinations of things.
They captured him really well in that Rappaport documentary of him just like grabbing a thing and then being like, yeah. And then you kind of caught him getting in a zone of the whole thing, but you could see him like kind of to your point earlier about like discovering samples. Like when I first heard it, I'm thinking like, you know, like at Publix when the lady like cuts me off a slice of the cake and like, here's a sample. But like, it's not really like that. It's almost like if you took the cake, disassembled it into its individual ingredients and then handed me a cup of flour and went, now go make bread. Like, okay.
And that's really topical because the internet thinks everything is cake right now. So it's a really topical example. Yeah, I remember you pointed out to me when we were doing that episode that he took that Minnie Riperton high vocal and he pitched it up even a little further, and it became the weird like Dr. Dre West Coast type noise, but from somebody's vocal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an art unto itself to hear it and to think like, how could this be a basis for something else, right? So like, we could do a whole nother episode, I think, just like deconstructing every beat he ever made.
Yeah.
Because he did it for himself, but he also did it for Nas, and he did it for lots of other people, and then along came Dilla and like really took all that to the next level. And I don't really have any Dilla stuff on here. But like Q-Tip is such a good piece of source material in general for like taking it above just having a break. And going from there. So there's two songs. There's the Rotary Connection song and the Grant Green song that are from Tribe. And then there's also Jimmy Smith. There's a long live jam from Jimmy Smith that the Beastie Boys took the root of. And they deserve their credit. They have done lots of different things musically. But having worked with Rick Rubin and the Dust Brothers and so many people over the years, they have a pretty rich musical vocabulary. I think that's the thing that I really want to emphasize throughout this is it takes a pretty huge musical vocabulary to like pull the right thing at the right moment and start to build a groove around it.
It's not random.
It's not random.
Yeah.
And it's pretty sophisticated, right? And a lot of these people make it look really easy.
Yeah.
But everybody who like uses this as a palette is a student of the game to some degree. So that Jimmy Smith jam, Root Down, is like, it's 10 or 15 minutes long. You can just like leave it on for a while. It's so great. And then the Bomb Squad, like, I mean, you can't talk hip hop without talking about the Bomb Squad and how innovative they were and how there was such an intentionality to the way they sampled. It was like a super pro-black thing and like all went into their agenda. But there are two songs, one of which is Public Enemy, that sampled one small piece of a Marva Whitney song that was either produced by James Brown. There's some JB's connection, I think. But there's a little part in the middle at 1:40 that's the bum, 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 bum. That's the intro to Fuck the Police, and then it's also used in Bring the Noise. Which is super interesting to me. But it's like some of the other things we talked about, like Root Down, the Beastie Boys song, the groove goes throughout, and it's really like the main part of the song, so you can see the one-to-one connection. But then there's that other idea, like with Marva Whitney, where you take a small piece and you like fractal it in a new way. And the best example of that in this whole block, which also includes Mandrill, which is just a sick groove that Public Enemy used for By the Time I Get to Arizona, and then Mind Playing Tricks on Me, one of the all-time great hip-hop songs, sampled Isaac Hayes. There's so much sampling of Isaac Hayes throughout that I didn't really want to belabor Isaac Hayes, or I didn't include any James Brown. I didn't include Amen Brother and the drum break from that is like the most famous drum break of all time. But at the end of this block is I Love Music by the Ahmad Jamal Trio. And it's a beautiful jazz piece. It's very like kaleidoscopic. It's about 7 or 8 minutes long. And there is a moment about 4:45 in where it starts to stride a little and they start to like get into a groove where it's more improvisational up to that point. And there's just a flicker where it like gets perfectly in sync in the stride right at 5 minutes. And if you're not actively listening to the song, you almost miss it. But that little piece of the song where everything like comes into focus musically became the main groove in The World Is Yours by Nas, which like pound for pound, everybody puts Illmatic in their top 10, who's like a real hip hop head, right? And coming from the South, I was not inclined to take any New York stuff seriously, like as a point of pride. But I finally, in high school, remember listening to Illmatic and being like, shit, this is the best hip hop. Like, this is so good. And he was 16. But The World Is Yours is just like such a hip hop classic, and it's so iconic. and it's definitely critical, like, to understanding the 90s sound, but it just took the smallest piece of this Ahmad Jamal jazz, right? And it has such a, like, a wistfulness and a cool vibe that it makes me feel like Nas and or the producer, like, took that record off their parents' shelf, and it was almost like honoring their parents for having that around or something like that. It just, like, something about it has that kind of honoring vibe. So this is a really incredible block, like,
Yeah.
in and of itself. And you see a ton of diversity, right? There's some jazz, some soul, some more funky stuff. It's really mostly, like, all from the mid 70s. Ahmad Jamal might be a little earlier.
I was cranking that Marva Whitney song the other day. Went through, like, pulled into my complex where I live, and one of my neighbors was like, "Oh, I was loving what I could hear you playing inside that car." Like, yeah, this block alone is a playlist worth repeating.
It's so good, right? And most of this stuff is like you're not gonna get to a lot of this stuff organically.
Yep.
It's all kind of deeper cut.
Yep.
So right away you can see, you throw any 2 or 3 things like this on a playlist and it elevates it some. You're the cool kid at the dinner party. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I totally started doing that as kind of a flex to be cool. But then you're like, there's so much good sounding music out there that you start to really revere it in a way. So my intentions were kind of bad when I started, but I got to a good place.
So to be really specific too, before we break into these actual songs, so especially for this, we'll not only have the playlist of the songs that we're talking about, but also make sure you have the accompanying playlist of the songs in which the songs were sampled.
Right.
So you can choose your own adventure, go back and forth between the two of them. To be honest, I've experienced both playlists that way, either going all the way top to bottom in each one or just going back and forth to hear them.
That's right.
Yeah, it's been
Or
been
do
really
the
fun.
Radiohead 1011110 thing where you line them up back to back. That's a little less fun for me, but I think any way you want to do it is fun. And I appreciated getting to do that for you. I think on both fronts with these playlists, there was more than pretty much any other time in the history of our friendship. Like, I've actually literally never heard this once before in my whole life.
Yeah, I had to make sure you knew. I don't know most of this stuff, right? Yeah.
That made me really happy. I mean, like, how long have we been doing this? And we don't have any more other blind spots that big.
Yeah.
Like, that's really exciting. So
Yeah.
if you have really good musical friendships, like, find the most personal place in your listening habits that you don't think is a secret but might be. This just happened to be mine. So enjoy this first block.
Right on.